like, you know, it tumbles down. Did you see the video?
Yeah, I got to concentrate here for just a second. Give me just a sec, if you would.
Yeah, somebody, it wasn't across the highway, it was coming down one of the avenues.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
It wasn't as big as the one that was in there.
I'll be right with you.
During the earthquake, but it was still, to watch that come down, and the person just stood there and took video of it. Are you kidding me?
Tim, my goal is not to fall this morning. Okay, we are communicating. You got it. You're under 40 years old. See, you're on top of the game. We got to rely on you now, young man. So are there live comments scrolling? Can you? Okay. Thanks. Wonderful. I'm going to do one little, hang on. Well, you want to see we got some folks with us here.
Never had that before.
Live stream, we're going to be live stream. Everybody wave to the camera.
Birds are funny too. Because
See, I just realized this is you're all going to be looking at your phones while I'm talking to you.
we got to get you those views.
Yeah, right.
Make sure to like and subscribe.
Yeah, smash that like button or whatever that obnoxious stuff is.
And you got a lot of windmills over there now.
Okay, I'm going to just spend a moment with you, home folks, and make sure that we're functional, and otherwise I'm going to ignore you. And my energy is going to be with these guys here who are have made the effort to come and join us this morning. And so there will be no live Q&A with you afterwards. I'm sorry. This is a live event, and so I will explain to them that I'm hoping to talk for about 45 minutes, and I'm going to be standing. Actually, can we try this? I'm going to be standing kind of like right here, and I'm going to be yelling. I'm going to be yelling to this group. I'm going to have an elevated voice kind of like this, and this is just a test. This is just a test. This is just a test. I'm testing the audio for the home folks. So that's going to work there. And did that work okay for you? I'm going to be speaking about like that. I don't know. Perfect. Thank you. Kathy in Australia, hello. Gordon in Scotland, hello. Zazu, scrolling too quickly now. So I'm just going to let you know that occasionally I'll come over here and spin you around just a little bit and show you a couple of things, but you know, it's not just me and you now. This is a group. We're back among the living. And so when I'm done with some live Q&A, and I'll make sure to repeat their questions, of course, so you can hear, then I'm just going to turn you off, and then I'm going to visit with these guys one-on-one for a while. So the Saracens brought Vindman's Bakery for everybody this morning, and it's a nice gathering. So I'm glad you could join us. Kind of like this. Can't zoom. Maybe I'll come a little. Maybe right in here. Okay, I'm going to check one more time, and then I'm going to ignore you the rest of the time. We got about 4 minutes before we start. One last check. We doing okay? We got about 300 people watching. I can't zoom. Well, you should see the river. Okay, good. Thanks for joining us. Where's that gal that came over to say hi and I ignored you because I was focusing? I got to find her. There she is. I'm technologically challenged. Hey!
Just wanted to say good morning.
Joan's sister, Amy. Hey, how are you?
Good.
Thanks for coming. It's
How
good
are
to
you?
see you today. Doing fine.
Quite a following here.
Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, that trip we did was the last public event
Was it?
I did, yeah. So that's a while ago now.
You've been
so.
teaching though online.
I have, yeah. So that's on my to-do list to kind of go back and do a little bit more with that area. I
Well,
know.
I'm very convinced that my family's not the place you were looking for.
Yeah,
I think it's out toward
Yeah.
Woodland, likely.
yeah. So yeah, it's on the list. Well, I'm
You know
glad.
what?
Yeah.
My grandmother's book that my mother, that Gladys, edited
Mhm.
together, Just Call Me Grandma. The original notes have just been committed to WSU Archives.
Oh, wow. Good.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to take a look at those.
They're not there yet, but
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Well, it looks like you're all comfortable. We're going to start in about 2 minutes, and I'm going to be standing, I think, about right here. So you're welcome to, if where you're sitting is great, that's great. If you want to move, that's great too. Oh my God, how many vehicles we got over there? They're still rolling it. This is a party. Yeah. Oh yeah, who came the farthest? Where's Puyallup? Salem, Oregon? I gotta shake your hand. You came from Salem. Yeah, man.
Pleasure, man.
Same here.
Rob McGee 100. If you ever see those comments on your
Yes,
on your
yes,
screen.
Rob.
Yeah,
You came over last night?
came last night.
Yeah.
Got some sunset shots.
Oh, did you? You've been out already, huh?
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, it's beautiful.
Nice. Well, thanks for making the trip. Thank you, Rob.
Bad hearing. I bet you were saying something weird.
Okay, Salem, Oregon's pretty tough to beat. I don't think we'll do much more voting. There's still some treats up here. Help yourself before we get started. There's Vinman's. Oh my God, yeah, come on now, please. Absolutely, Hugh, come on.
Watching your show.
Oh, do you want me to hand deliver these things? What the? The Sorensens did, or maybe
Oh,
some other
someone
folks
did.
did too.
Thank you.
Who else did this?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, they put them in
me to take it
individual.
around for you?
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you.
I recommend the lemon bars.
Lemon bars. This episode of Nick. Yeah, okay. Oh. We got about 500 watching us at home, and we got plenty here.
I did sample as I cut them up, but
The dissenting opinion on the sweets from Spud Nuts Richland.
Okay. Spud Nuts Richland. Yes.
you're even prettier in person.
Okay, I think it's time to begin. I love you too. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I have 8 o'clock and I'd like to get started. Of course, we'll have some people trickling in as they come, but we're going to get rolling. And I have a specific plan. Oh, the train boy, we got a train coming through already. So I have a very specific plan this morning, and we'll see if it works. This is the first time I've done this, and the first time I've done a public talk in a year and a half, so it feels great to be back among folks. Yes, give yourself a round of applause for being here this morning. And we do have some home viewers as well. So my plan is to talk for about 45 minutes. We'll see if it happens, but that's the plan, about 45 minutes. And you're like, well, wait a minute, where's the chalkboard? No chalkboard. Where's the whiteboard? No whiteboard. Where are the handouts? Where are the maps? I mean, I've been on geology field trips. Don't we have a bunch of stuff to look at? And the answer is no, on purpose. This is a minimalist opportunity. This is something that I have done very little to prepare for. I spent some time yesterday, and I've got a few notes in my back pocket, literally. But the hope here with this new kind of event is to meet in the field, as we're doing right now, and to use this view like we are out here together. This is it. This isn't a green screen. This is not a video screen. This is real life right here. And I have noticed over the years, whether it's geology field trips that I've been a participant on or maybe something that I've led, where we're standing in a beautiful spot learning geology and we're all looking down. We're all looking at the map or the photos or the cozy fort in a video screen or something like that. So this is a thing on purpose where we use the view that we have, and the plan I have is to be very disciplined about this. So I'd like to spend, 5 minutes or more just pointing out landmarks. Some of you are from far away, some of you are from right here. But just to try to be descriptive about where we are, dimensions, elevations, that sort of thing. And it might feel a little stale. It might be like, get to the good stuff. Tell us some stories. What happened? The Ice Age floods and the lavas and the petrified wood. We'll get there, but I want to be disciplined. And if you've seen some of my stuff previously, you know that's an important thing, that we have ground truth for our stories. And the ground truth is in our field of view right here. The other thing, just conceptually before I begin, is we will do some live Q&A. And I hope that you have some questions. I'm sure that you will. I'll repeat them quickly and loudly for our home audience. And we'll do that for a few minutes. And then we'll cut it off. And if you want to visit a little bit one-on-one afterwards, that sounds great. But I want to be done and back to the cars and away we go, no trace of us essentially in an hour and a half, something like that, I don't know. So that's my plan. I purposely did this and announced this just 48 hours in advance. And I think if I do more of these pop-up geology things, that will be my approach. I want the weather to be good, I want the wind to be down. There's some thought to the wind and how and why and the conditions. And so there's benefits for that kind of impromptu type stuff. So thank you so much for being here. All right. Should we start? Okay, let's start. You're looking west across the Columbia River. West Bar is the main feature. West Bar are those blonde hills that are down low. And feel free, by the way, to stand up occasionally if you can't see what I'm pointing out and kind of crane your neck or turn yourself around. I'm going to use a 360-degree view here. And again, our home audience is going to be ripped off. I'm not going to be spinning that around for them, okay? I'm just ignoring them. So as we look at West Bar, I hope that you can see there's two distinct levels. There's the blonde hills that are making a nice flat spot. And I think we all know, don't we, that West Bar is famous because there's some little corrugations. There's some little ridges on a Ruffles potato chip across the way. Those are the famous giant current ripples of West Bar. But if we scan to the right, so I'm going to do a lot of talking. By the way, it's just me standing here talking. It's like, my God, I thought we should have gone to a yard sale or something. This guy's just like, he's just standing there talking. I'm going to talk and point and talk and sometimes point and talk at the same time. I've been practicing. So here we go. I can talk and point at the same time. So the upper West Bar surface, the blonde hills, are the current ripples, but notice down low, there's on the inside of the Columbia's meander, there are no current ripples, and it's a lower elevation. What's the story? We'll get there, but we're just making observations. Okay? That is a featured place. And I think I've said more than once, if I had somebody in my office back in Ellensburg and they were very confrontational and saying this Ice Age floods thing you keep talking about is all baloney, and I don't believe there were ever even one Ice Age flood, if I only had one place to take them to try to have them explain, I think it would be these giant current ripples across the way. And you're like, well, I'm not even sure I see them. Well, the light is not perfect right now to see them, but thankfully there's lots of videos. There's lots of books. There's lots of publications that showcase these giant current ripples in perfect light. Okay, so West Bar, giant current ripples, and then a lower bench across the way. That's Kittitas County across the way. Now there's a big cliff made out of lava rock. That's basalt. That's the German chocolate cake. And if we go up higher and higher to the forested ridge, that's still Columbia River basalt lava. More on that in just a bit. This, of course, is the Columbia River, but it's not a river anymore. It's a lake. It's a series of lakes. We've built dams in the 20th century to stop that wild river. If you're a fan of whitewater rafting, there's some amazing stuff, amazing photos, amazing stories of rapids and whitewater rafting, very exciting stuff before the 20th century. But those are no more. And down this way, we can see we have German chocolate cake or the Columbia River basalt lavas on both sides and some very sheer walls. He goes to the back pocket. I've got some elevations for you. So essentially this, I'm going to talk about it as the Columbia River, but it's essentially called Lake Wanapum. And so this is dammed river water behind Wanapum Dam south of Vantage. Wanapum Dam constructed in 1963. So Lake Wanapum is at elevation 574 feet above sea level. 574 is the elevation of the boats that are down there. 574. We are at 1270, 1,270 feet above sea level. So we are about 700 feet above the Columbia River right here on this bench. This bench is known as Babcock Bench. What am I doing? I'm just pointing out places, names, figures, elevations. We'll get to the good stuff, but we want to make some observations first. So this Babcock Bench, especially as we look to the south, is a beautiful semi-horizontal surface. If you swing your eyes this way, behind some of you, this is gravel, a big gravel pit, a borrow pit. That's part of our story. So in other words, this is exposed basalt bedrock on Babcock Bench for the most part, but there's a couple places where we have some piles of gravel. Most people wouldn't give the gravel a second thought. Of course we do. Behind Babcock Bench, now we're squinting behind you. Again, feel free to stand up and look around if you like. There's another escarpment, another steep cliff, not quite as high, and then there's the skyline that we all cross to drop down onto Babcock Bench. That's known as Babcock Ridge. So you're on Babcock Bench. That's Babcock Ridge. And on the other side of Babcock Ridge is Quincy Basin. Quincy Basin, I-90, Moses Lake, George, right? Pretty flat over there. So there's a flat, open Quincy Basin. There's an important ridge, Babcock Ridge, that separates Quincy Basin from us on this side. I'm setting you up if you haven't figured it out. I'm setting you up for some discussions, mostly about the Ice Age floods, and Babcock Ridge is important. Let's continue with our survey of what's in front of us. Nothing but basalt that we can see above West Bar. I'm not positioned perfectly for you all, but especially if you take a few steps to the north, you can see that all those houses near Trinidad, they're not built on basalt lava. So in other words, as you use this view, just take a quick inventory with your eyes. Most of it is the dark lava rock, right? The basalt bedrock, which underlies everything, of course. But there are places where we don't have basalt bedrock and we have something else. And all of those houses, especially down there along the river and where the railroad grade is, notice that's very light colored. That's a huge pile of gravels, light colored gravels, similar in composition to the gravels that are right over here. So there's hundreds of vertical feet, especially if you walk over there after a little session, you'll see how much of the light colored gravels are over there. There's got to be a story for those. Couple final things and then we'll start talking about geology specifically. Thank you for your attention. This is wonderful. You could hear a pin drop right here. The elevation of the top of Babcock Bench in general is about 1420-ish. 1420, so about almost 200 feet higher than where we are here. Elevation here about 200 feet rise. Again, it's about a 700-foot high wall that you're looking at in the shadows. And if you really love this place and want to come back, very late afternoon, the last few minutes of daylight, this wall lights up beautifully. And there's photos on that Tom Foster took and others of this beautiful wall. It's really a handsome wall with that kind of lighting, but it's kind of a nice view here as well. All right, I'm getting impatient, but I want to do a couple more things. Upstream, notice that the river is curving here. This is one of the significant curves of the river, even before the dams were constructed. If we go upstream and we lose the river, we're going to go up to Wenatchee. So now I think the last thing I want to do is just go from Wenatchee down to Vantage and verbally give you some key places which we may or may not weave into this story. So some of you are from Wenatchee. So Wenatchee, elevation 780 feet above sea level. East Wenatchee is built on the Pangbourne area. The Pangbourne, another pile of light-colored gravels, I might add. Now, let's leave Wenatchee and come downriver and start sailing as Thomas Simons did in the fall of 1881. We'll be doing that in just a bit. We approach Rock Island Rapids, which are no longer rapids. They've been buried by standing water when Rock Island Dam was put in. Rock Island Dam, the first dam on the Columbia River. 1933 it opened. The first of all the dams on the Columbia, Rock Island Dam, out of sight from here. Continue south from Rock Island Dam. We got big Moses Coulee coming in from the northeast. Some folks call it the Palisades. Moses Coulee, approaching and dumping into the Columbia River. Cabinet Rapids is and was at the mouth of Moses Coulee. Just downstream from Cabinet Rapids, there's a knob of basalt that's sticking its head up above the water. Even today, that's the very top of Victoria Rock. But before 1933, you had a full sphinx-like head, named after Queen Victoria by the early explorers. Randy Lewis from Wenatchee says, yeah, we don't call that Victoria Rock. We call that Ugly Face or Ugly Head. Now we're coming right to where we can see the water. Tarpiskin Creek is coming in from the west. You see just to the north of West Bar, there's an open area. That's Tarpiskin Canyon. Just at that spot, Spanish Castle, some of you know that name. Spanish Castle. Now we come around West Bar, not visible to most of us, but there's an important coulee coming in from the northeast where the railroad disappears. That's Lynch Coulee coming in. And out of sight behind those evergreen, or those standing trees, is Crater Coulee, a connector between Quincy Basin and Lynch Coulee. Let me stop for a second. So this feels weird, I gotta say. This is a new thing for me. We're not looking at a map. It feels weird. But I think it might work, not only in real time, but also for folks who can watch this replay and maybe sit down and look at a map as they're looking at this sort of thing. I have found in the last year and a half, I've learned a bunch. One of the things I've learned is that just the spoken word, if done properly, and that's my goal, to do it properly, has some power to it. And the shuffling of the papers and the writing all the stuff on the chart, it's kind of a distraction, especially if we're out here enjoying this together. So it's kind of like a radio program in a way, like a podcast, but we're out here together. So it's an experiment. It does feel weird at the moment. I feel like I want to move on now too. But I still want to point out a couple of things, and then we'll see how we go. And remember now, I'm going to lean on you for some questions coming in, I don't know, half an hour. Okay, great. Just another drainage is coming in just south of West Bar. Can you see it? Another canyon coming in, and there's some piles of light-colored gravels right at the mouth you may be able to see. I don't know if I can pronounce this one. Tekison. Tekison Creek coming in. Let's continue south now around the corner and out of field of view. Babcock Bench continues as far as we can see. Can you see a continuation of our level all the way down? And can you see a beautiful shadow with this sheared face, that 200-foot face on the side of Babcock Ridge, which eventually becomes Evergreen Ridge? Important. So this is a major feature, this Babcock Bench. What do you notice in the distance above Babcock Bench? The Gorge Amphitheater. Who's seen a music show at the Gorge Amphitheater? Who'd you see? Dave Matthews. Who else? Charlie Daniels. Foo Fighters. Stevie Nicks. Keith Urban. Steely Dan? Did you really? I was listening to Steely Dan coming over here. I didn't know they played that. So that Gorge Amphitheater stage is looking kind of towards us, looking across the river basically, but we're looking at Babcock Bench, which is right down below the stage of the Gorge Amphitheater. Between us and the Gorge Amphitheater, many of you know, there is a major coulee that we can just see the mouth of. It's known as Potholes Coulee. Some people call it Ancient Lake. So if you leave us and you're still in the mood and you're not too hot, you can drive the dirt road another, 2-3 miles. It dead ends down there by the Bishop's Place, and then you can hike into the Potholes Coulee, a very important place. You can barely see the mouth of it from here, but it is a major feature. Across the river, again, I'm pointing to it, but we can't really see it. Across the river immediately from the mouth of Potholes Coulee is a place called Logistic Bluff. Now, I'm very interested in Logistic Bluff at the moment because there is one place of Logistic Bluff that was a major landmark for early river travelers in the 19th century. It's one vertical stick of petrified wood, a big log pressed up against a sheer wall on the west side of the river. Before I forget it, if you want to try, if you got a good scoping whatever, high-powered binoculars, if you drive down to the end of this today, hike out into the floor of Potholes Coulee, work your way towards the river, not easy, and then really spend some time looking at that wall across the way, you might have the lighting conditions possible to see that one beautiful lodge stick. But I'm going to come back and use that because I can't hold it. Native Americans and the earliest white guys coming down the river assumed that that lodge stick, I'll just call it a log, they weren't sure it was petrified or not because it's hanging up there hundreds of feet above the river, but especially the Native Americans, but even the early white guys thought there must have been some kind of flood or something coming down this canyon to lodge that log up there along the cliff. Well, let's not get carried away. We do know there is a significant Ice Age flood history through this canyon, but lodge stick has nothing to do with it. That lodge stick did not move. That's part of the petrified wood and the Columbia River basalt bedrock. It's exposed by the Ice Age floods, but not brought in there and dumped by water. We continue south, Skookumchuck Creek, Brushy Creek, Quillamine Creek, Guaquil Rapids, and then we eventually get down to Wanapum Dam, 1963. All right. Hey, not even a wisp of breeze here this morning. Loving it. Let's get to the good stuff. Thank you for your patience. Let me do a little bit with the Columbia River basalt geology, much of which you've heard if you've seen programs before. Let's do a little bit with the petrified wood. Let's do a little bit with the Ice Age floods. And let's do a little bit with Thomas Simons's journal as he's coming down this river in October of 1881. And then we'll open it up to your questions. Can he do it in 20 minutes? I think I can. The basalt bedrock is 16 million years old, and Babcock Bench is right at the very tippy top of the Grand Ronde lavas. So below our feet are a whole series of lava flows that were erupted during Grand Ronde time between 16.5 and 16.1 million years ago. So we're right at the boundary between the Grand Ronde lavas and the younger lavas behind you, which are part of the Frenchman Springs lavas or the Wanapum lavas. So the vantage sediment should be here. The vantage sandstone, which is most famously yielding thousands of petrified logs. They were here once upon a time, but they are gone. We're right at the horizon. We should have the most impressive petrified log diverse forest. However, if you go down into this cliff, Crescent Bar is right below us. Did you peek over? There's a golf course, a bunch of houses, and there's that 700-foot sheer wall right below us. There are layers where there are some pillow lavas, and there's petrified wood, petrified logs underneath us, in between some of the Grand Ronde lava flows. But by far the most famous, the most rich layer of petrified wood logs is coming right from where we are here. And I always use this Babcock Bench as a landmark because it's resistant. It's difficult to erode the top of the Grand Ronde lavas. These younger Wanapum lavas and the Saddle Mountain lavas are so easy to erode. Don't ask me why. Well, there's reasons, but let's not go there. The floor of the Grand Coulee is where you're sitting. The floor below Dry Falls is this layer right here. So you can follow this top of the Grand Ronde lavas all through eastern Washington if you know how to keep track of these, what most people think of as kind of boring, monotonous brown layers. This is an important boundary right here. Looking across the way then, can you see a continuation of us across the way? We're basically the top of the Grand Ronde lavas here, and the top of the Grand Ronde lavas are pretty much at the top of that cliff above West Bar. So we peel back to find some of the Wanapum lavas, which are easy to erode, but our horizon continues to the top of that cliff across the way. You can make out, can't you, that these layers are not perfectly flat anymore. They were originally, we assume, but they've been tipped, they've been folded in some places, most famously south of Ellensburg at the Yakima River Canyon, or this way up Moses Coulee, Badger Mountain, Douglas Creek. There's some good folding of these Grand Ronde lavas through there. The German chocolate cake or the Grand Ronde lavas are about a mile thick right here if we started drilling right beneath this spot, a mile thick. And if we got below the lavas, what would we find? Well, over this ridge is Swak sedimentary rock, Swak Formation, Chumpstick Formation, and the Leavenworth Fault, which I was studying with my students, and maybe you saw some of those this spring, Geology 351. The trend of the Leavenworth Fault, which is no longer active, by the way, it's been dead for 40 million years, but that Leavenworth Fault continues beneath us and continues beneath these Columbia River basalt lavas. It's not that far away that we can get out of these lavas. So it looks like we got nothing but these lavas as far as the eye can see. Well, that's true. We can follow them all the way to Idaho. We can follow them all the way to Oregon. But here, once we get over that forested ridge, we're off, jump off Joe Ridge, we're into the Malaga Slide, and then suddenly we're out of the Columbia River basalt lavas. Seriously, are we out here talking about lavas for an hour? Why don't you start talking about the Ice Age floods? Okay, I can do that right now. First message. We have excellent evidence now that there was more than one Ice Age flood. So if you take the time to look at these features, including the giant current ripples, it's obvious there was a hell of a lot of water moving quickly over this area. But we now are for sure that we had more than one flood. And you're like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. You find these slack water sediment layers and you count up these Lake Lewis generations and we're up to 40 or 80 or 100 separate Ice Age floods. Maybe some of them coming from Missoula, Montana, some coming from Canada, some coming from Glacial Lake Columbia. Well, I'm not really talking about that here. There's a few fragile slack water sediment layers down over by Trinidad, but for the most part, there's major features here that talk about Ice Age floods. Like what? Well, let's start with the obvious. Those giant current ripples, which you can barely make out, are about 30 feet high. Each ridge is about 30 feet high of gravel and boulders. They're spaced about 50 to 100 yards from crest to crest. So this is like a football field between one crest and the next. And there's some pretty basic math that's been applied to say how much water and how much speed do we need to create those giant current ripples. That's been done. You ready for a major message? Those ripples are not from the biggest flood that came down over this area. Not. They're impressive, but these giant current ripples were deposited or created during the last flood, the last Ice Age flood, dated now at about 14,000 years ago. And you're like, where'd you pull that number out? Well, I don't have it in my pocket, but geologists in the last 10 years have been over to West Bar. They have been sampling surfaces of boulders and measuring the number of years that cosmogenic radiation has been striking the surface of those boulders. Surface exposure, I don't have time to get into it if you've never heard of that before, but there's good dates from that upper surface that the last major flood, 14,000 years ago, created those boulders. That means that the water that created those ripples was not deep enough to sweep you away up here. This was high and dry during that 14,000 year Ice Age flood. There were less than 700 feet of water coming over that area and creating the West Bar mega ripples. Why did the 14,000 year flood happen? Many of you have heard of the Okanagan Lobe, or the ice sheet known as the Okanagan Ice Sheet north of here. And when the Okanagan Lobe was sitting in place, it blocked the Columbia River. And when the Okanagan Lobe was in place, the Columbia River was diverted over Dry Falls, was diverted down over Dry Falls and through the Grand Coulee, and down to Drumheller Channels, and down Crab Creek, and re-entering the Columbia. So this 14,000 year flood did not happen when the Okanagan lobe was in place. This 14,000-year-old Ice Age flood did not happen before the Okanagan lobe got in place and blocked the Columbia. It happened after, or more specifically, this 14,000-year-old Ice Age flood happened when the Okanagan lobe finally failed, when it broke up. And blocks of ice are coming down this view, dirty brown water, blocks of ice, floating icebergs carrying big boulders, and coming through this area, and at the bottom of that 14,000-year-old flood creating the giant current ripples. The breakup of the Okanagan lobe, the draining of glacial Lake Columbia up by Grand Coulee Dam, that's why those giant current ripples are here. But that's a young event compared to the other Ice Age floods that we have recorded here. Before I forget, Richard Waite and a few other geologists in the last 10 years have identified that our extension of West Bar, remember we have our rippled corrugated West Bar and then we have this lower bench with no ripples on it. Richard Waite and a few others say that's the last Ice Age flood that came in, smaller yet, about 13,300 calendar years ago, and laid down that material, laid down some of the material between Gress and Bar, underneath Sunland Estates, and so on. So there's different levels of gravels, essentially, that were dumped into this valley late in the game. Most of you are still with me. I can feel it. You're warming up. I'm sweating now, but we're doing okay. I've got a few more things to say. This was not always high and dry. In other words, before 14,000 years ago, there were truly gargantuan Ice Age floods that came down the Columbia River and or came down Moses Coulee, which remember is upstream from us. And that water also came through here. Oh, really? What evidence do you have for that? Well, how about that gravel pile? That gravel pile is a direct deposit of the Ice Age floods. Not 14,000 years ago, because I just said that that was a smaller flood, right? That didn't get deep enough, the water didn't get deep enough to cover our area. But this gravel pile has been carefully studied and quarried, obviously. And beyond this, impossible for us to see, even if you walked this bench for a while. And let's say you just start walking this way for 20 minutes after we're done. There's giant current ripples right over there. But you can't see them. You're on top of them. You need to get up in a drone or something else, and maybe if you perch yourself up there, some of the photographers. Speaking of which, I brought just a few books. This episode of Nick from the Classroom, brought to you by Ice Age Floodscapes of the Pacific Northwest by Bruce Bjornstad, a wonderful new book. And it's a coffee table type book, but it's more than that. And I've earmarked one page because Bruce has a beautiful drone. This whole book is just Bruce going up with a drone and snapping photos at optimum light. And his photo here shows where we're sitting on page 110. And he shows the giant current ripples that are just beyond this pit. You can see the pit. Beautiful. Maybe from where you're sitting, you can see the pit. So there are some flood deposited gravels that are up here on this bench. But wait, there's more. Beyond the giant current ripples on Babcock Bench, also featured in Bruce's new book, are incredibly scalloped basalt surfaces. It looks wormy in its look. And just walking over that, now I'm talking about down by at the end of the road, if you go out and walk, you'll find these incredible scoured surfaces. There was 180 feet of water. I don't know how fast it was moving, but it was moving over our Babcock Bench area. I'm cutting to the chase now. This Babcock Bench is flood scoured by some of the biggest Ice Age floods. So wait a minute, that means that most of the Columbia Valley had already been cut. Yeah, I think so. So that's 700 feet of water plus another 200. So now we're up to 900 feet of water? Yes. 18,000 years ago is our best date for that last major flood, but depending on which geologist you talk to, there are much earlier times, maybe even more than 800,000 years ago, that we had massive ice age floods where this was wet, it was wet down there as well. And those light colored gravels beneath those houses are from these monster ice age flood events. Pangbourne Bar, all those light gravels that you can see underneath the Trinidad area. Can you just picture? Remember, there's water above us right here. It's chocolate brown water. There's icebergs floating above our heads, carrying these big rocks, and we've got just an eddy. We've just got a circular kind of getting quiet water up here in that area. The main velocity of the water is coming down the guts of the Columbia Valley, but these side channels where the water is slowing down and swirling are depositing a lot of those rocks. Why is this spot favored to drop a bunch of gravels? I'm not sure. Maybe it was a little bit lower in here. I'm just noticing right now. Maybe we had a little drainage here that a bunch of those gravels were put in. That means that up close to the summit of the Babcock Ridge, there are erratics. There are big granite boulders perched high. Why? Remember, we got water above us. The icebergs are above us. The icebergs, just like in a flood, can you picture a bunch of logs coming down a river during a flood time? The logs are trying to get out to the quiet water in the side. Same with the Ice Age icebergs. And they're bringing these and parking these granite boulders up above here and up each of these side channels. So you can hike many miles up each of these. I already forgot the names. What, Tarpiskin did I say? And the other one I couldn't pronounce. Each of these side drainages, even down by Vantage, there's an amazing amount of iceberg deposited white rocks, non-basalt rocks, carried by these ice age floods. Are you starting to see why this is a special place and why we're meeting here and not other places? I got a couple final things, and then we'll go to a little bit of 1881 River Journal stuff, and then we'll quit. There's a few notches in this ridge. Not super obvious to you. I don't know, does the road come down one notch? Is that not really sure. I never thought to look that up till right now. The Gorge Amphitheater is a notch, and there's a gravel bar right below the stage. Now here we go. Where Ice Age floodwater from the Quincy Basin is getting deep enough to spill over the ridge and into the Columbia. We're getting complicated now. So far, all we've been thinking about is water coming down the Columbia, and that happened many times. But what happens if you have water primarily coming down Dry Falls, down the Grand Coulee? That's not water coming here. That's water being diverted into Grand Coulee, kind of like Grand Coulee Dam today is diverting water into Banks Lake, etc. So during the Ice Age, we had a dam, the Okanagan Dam, right at Grand Coulee Dam. We had Ice Age flood water coming from Montana, Missoula floodwater, coming down Grand Coulee, over Dry Falls. Where does it go now? It gets to Soap Lake. Each of those floods leaves Soap Lake, spreads out into Quincy Basin over Moses Lake. I like to think of Quincy Basin, I'm pointing to it, we can't see it, it's on the other side of the ridge, right? I like to think of Quincy Basin as one big kiddie pool. You know the kiddie pool out in the backyard, little plasticky thing? Get the garden hose, you fill up the kiddie pool, and if you forget to turn off the garden hose, you're going to start overtopping all sides of the kiddie pool, correct? Well, what if the sides of your kiddie pool are not all perfectly intact? What if you took a utility knife and cut some notches of different elevations around the margin of your kiddie pool? Wouldn't you have spillways then? where water is leaving your kiddie pool, not over the top the whole time, but it would be preferentially coming over those little low notches around the margin. That's why these notches are important. You're like, oh really, I've never heard this before. So you're telling me that Ice Age floodwater was leaving Quincy Basin after it came down the Grand Coulee, and then it overtopped this ridge and cascaded into the Columbia River Gorge? You're damn right I am. It's like, where is that? Frenchman Coulee. Potholes Coulee. You okay, young man? Can I help you?
I'm good.
Okay. That was a big moment. We had somebody fall over in their chair. They're so excited. So Crater Coulee, Potholes Coulee, Gorge Amphitheater, Frenchman Coulee are all places where we had water coming across the ridge through those gaps and dumping in. So there's therefore ways to realize that not all of the flood deposits were in the valley here. Some of the flood deposits are coming from the other side, and we had slack water coming up the Columbia River. And you're like, okay, just tell me there's Ice Age floods here and I'll be happy, all right? Now we got all this complication. That's the point. And you can't tell your stories and get spun off on some crazy narrative without bringing it back to the ground truth that's out here. A couple final words about that. At the mouth of Moses Coulee, I'm pointing to it, but we can't see it, it's around the corner. There once was a huge flood bar that choked the mouth of Moses Coulee. And there are 5 distinctly different gravel beds that are 100% basaltic. Not light-colored gravel like we have here. That's the crystalline rock coming down the Columbia, but basaltic stuff that came over land and through Moses Coulee. But there's some quiet slackwater deposits from so much water coming over Potholes Coulee or Frenchman Coulee. There was so much water that it started to creep up the Columbia and leave quiet slack water in many of these low spots. We finish with a couple of quick journal entries from Thomas Simons. I did a live stream on him about a year ago, and I promise this is going to be 5 minutes. This is an excellent publication called Report of an Examination of the Upper Columbia River and Territory in its Vicinity. Thomas Simons was paid to come down the river and assess the river for its potential, which of course means what has happened: damming the river, harnessing its power, and changing the river significantly. I love his account of certain stretches from BC all the way down to Portland, but I've earmarked a couple of places. He writes a very exciting account of shooting through Rock Island Rapids, which was a major issue. I'm going to start there really quickly, and then we'll talk about him coming right in front of us here with his boat, with his co-worker from the Corps of Engineers who did the map making, and Pierre, the Native American in his early 70s who had bad eyesight but was the best guy to get them through these rapids, and a few other Native Americans to help out. So here's Simons and party in one boat coming down over Rock Island Rapids. All along the east side of the Columbia, can you picture Rock Island Rapids? Right by Rock Island Dam, not far from here. All along on the east side of the Columbia, the bluffs are precipitous and 2,000 to 2,500 feet high, bit of an exaggeration, being in some places nearly perpendicular and in others slightly broken away. In some places, the bluffs recede short distance from the shore to give place to boulder flats. The west side, opposite side of the river, is still more mountainous, but it's broken here and there by a small stream, and through the gaps, distant views of wooded and snowy mountains are had. He's doing this in October 1881. Nothing of this kind breaks the monotony of the eastern shore, vertical wall. There are several Indian farms along the river between Chelan and this Rock Island Rapids, and a number of Chinese miners were passed during the day. An excellent route for a portage exists along the western shore on a terrace about 100 feet above the water. Then they get through the rapids, that's really exciting. Then they pass Victoria Rock. Again, just the very tippy top of Victoria Rock is still visible. But this is the part I want to share with you. A mile further down from Victoria Rock. Now he's within view. He's coming around the corner. He and Pierre and the others. The portion of this river in which, is situated very grand and beautiful. The banks are nearly precipitous bluffs composed of columnar basalt, which takes wonderful shapes and produces many pleasing effects, rivaling the famous Giant's Causeway of Ireland in weird beauty. He's looking right above Crescent Bar, right below us. The columns in every conceivable position, sometimes piled up like cordwood, in some places erect, in others inclined. Some great masses are twisted and bent, forming niches, arches, grottos, crowns, etc. In one of these niches, now he's downstream around the corner, 1,000 feet above the river, there lies in an inclined position a stick of timber, barkless and white with age. It never grew there. It is 1,000 feet from the top of the vertical bluffs and could not have been put there from above. The only way in which it could have reached its present position was by being caught there when the river was 1,000 feet higher than it is now, drifting in and lodging, and being left there by the receding river. My pilot, old Pierre, an Indian pilot and a voyageur of the old Hudson Bay Company, said that this log, Logitech Bluff I'm talking about, and the lodge stick itself, was a landmark in the days when this company transported their furs and merchandise up and down the river in bateaux. He says that the Indians always considered that the log was left there when the river was up at that height. This is one link in the chain of evidence that proves that at no distant date the Columbia was a stream of such magnificent proportions that the present river is a tiny rivulet compared to it. If this be the true explanation of the location of this log, it is a remarkable example of the preservation of wood for a long period of time. It may be that the log is petrified, but I have no means of getting to it at this time. And then he goes on to talk about other geologic observations, that there are other places where all these gravels are deposited. So he was on it and he was off of it. He was on it that there was evidence of major ice age floods. This is 50 years ago, but 50 years before J. Harlan Brett's, by the way. And the guy's talking about a lot of water coming down this valley. This guy also is the first to draft up a map of Lake Lewis, which again is usually attributed to J. Harlan Brett's in the 1920s, but this guy 50 years earlier is on to this. But that lodge stick itself is not evidence of a flood. It's in place because the floods etched out and eroded a bunch of the basalt and revealed one of hundreds of other inclined vertical logs, petrified, that are between these pillows. And there's some of those vertical logs beneath us right now at that same horizon. But they're in prison with basalt on all sides. What else do I have here before I quit? I checked this out from the Ellensburg Public Library just yesterday. William Lehman has done another beautiful coffee table book. It's called Native River, the Columbia Remembered. Because currently I'm very interested in what the Columbia looked like at different stretches before the dams were constructed. And this is a beautiful job. There's an emphasis on Native American pictographs as well. That's interesting to me, but also just these beautiful old photographs of these rapids as they existed for, what, at least 15,000 years, and folks knowing those rapids and shooting those rapids very well. I was also given by Tim this morning a very special gift This is an original, The Grand Coulee by J. Harlan Bretz, published in 1932. I've never owned one of these, so thanks to Tim for that. Thanks for your attention, everybody. Thanks for being here. Let's do a little bit of live Q&A, and if you've had enough and you're getting too warm, grab a Vinman's on your way back. But we'll just do, I don't know, 10 minutes or so of live Q&A, kind of a little hot pepper back and forth, and then we'll shut the camera off here. Young man.
One of the journal entries, you mentioned arches. Do you know of any arches along the river?
The question is, do I know of any arches along the river? Simons was just mentioning arches quickly. I don't. Does anybody offhand have an arch in mind? You're pointing to it.
Past Moses, or up in there, if you look up way high, there's a
Kind of archway in the walls of Moses Coulee, you're thinking? Or
Downriver from Moses.
downriver from Moses, there's a few little alcoves where you, yes, got it. That's probably one of the examples he's talking about. Maybe not a true arch, but just kind of a...
Just where you cross the bridge right up there by the orchards.
Okay,
At the mouth, you look up and see it up in the cliff.
wonderful. More questions from you. Young lady in the back.
So at the Yakima Museum, they have that display of the petrified logs
Yes,
that come from Terrace Heights.
yes,
Outside of Yakima.
yes.
Huge assembly of them.
Yeah.
How were those formed? How were those formed? How did they get there?
Good question. The question is about, at the Yakima Museum, there's a petrified log display, donated, I assume, by Clyde Friend, who owns property way at the very top above Terrace Heights, east of Yakima. I was up there last year looking at his forest of petrified logs that were just what we're talking about here with Logitech. They're vertical, surrounded by pillow basalt. I've forgotten if that's the exact same horizon as Logistic Bluff or not. I'll have to, give me a second here. There's about 4 different log horizons. So there's 4 different-ish petrified wood log horizons. Not every layer is burying a bunch of trees. But then the simple answer to your question is those logs used to be at this level, but they've been then uplifted. So many of the layers are not flat anymore down by Yakima. They've been folded due to the clockwise rotation. Geologic lifting because of the arching and the folding of the bedrock layers. So that's why those logs are so high now. Not glaciers, not water. Yeah, just kind of a tectonic warping and lifting of those originally flat layers. Thanks. More? Yeah.
So all this basalt that got washed down, did it end up at Wallula Gap in Lake Lewis? Is that where it all got dumped?
So where did all the basalt go? If we're taking out so much basalt out of each of these major coulees, Moses Coulee, Potholes Coulee, where can we go find all that basalt that was ripped up and sent out? There's 2 ways to answer it. One is that each time you slow the water down, you're going to drop a bunch of it. So some of the basalt that should be in Frenchman Coulee is just around the corner and deposited 2 miles downstream. Some of it's broken up and broken up and broken up and sent all the way down to the Pacific Ocean. So there's different scattered locations where the basalt is pulverized, crushed, and then dropped. And in some cases, there wasn't a whole lot of pulverization at all. And you can find big piles of those basalt boulders here and there. Yes, sir?
If you were able to cut West Bar in half, could you see the difference in layers of floods?
Interesting question. So if we take a magic knife and cut into West Bar and look at the guts, would we see different layers? I don't know, but I don't think so. I assume that everything on that elevated surface was deposited by that 14,000-year flood. Now, what evidence do I have for that? Has anybody done that? No. Like, look, we've got exposure right over there. It's an interesting question. Are the ripples are we kind of mantling just how much of West Bar existed before 14,000 years ago is kind of your question. I don't know the answer. Never really given that much thought. Great question. Yes?
I keep hearing about ice age floods,
Yep.
but I don't hear about the glaciers retreating and leaving behind outwash plains like there is south of Wenatchee.
Sure.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence for things like that?
There is a little bit. The question is, we're talking about ice age floods here, but not the ice sheet itself. So number one, there was no ice here for sure ever. We have no evidence for an ice sheet right here. If we go halfway up Moses Coulee, where US 2 is crossing Moses Coulee, there's a terminal moraine there. And so basically I use US 2 between Orondo and Waterville and Coulee City. Everything north of US 2 was under ice. Everything south of US 2 never had the ice sheet sitting on top of it. But your question is, are there any outwash plains or outwash gravels that were deposited by the ice directly, or meltwater coming off of the ice? And the answer is yes, some of those outwash plains have been identified. Not here, we're too far south, but something called the Great Terrace, which is still a bit of a mystery. But if you know up by Chelan, if we follow this river up past Wenatchee, go up toward Chelan, on both sides of the Columbia River, even the Chelan Airport is built directly on this amazingly flat terrace, which is interpreted as outwash gravels deposited off of that retreating ice. So the short answer is we're too far south for it here, but another 20-minute drive and we could get to some of those outwash gravels as we understand them. Couple final questions and then we'll break it into one-on-one stuff. Yes, sir.
What is the reason for assuming that, say, this bench was eroded when the river was down there and there was so much water? Wouldn't it make more sense that this might have been eroded when the river bottom was higher and then subsequently worked its way down?
Interesting question. I think I have it. There's many features on this bench that talk of catastrophic flooding and not just regular erosion by a river. Again, a big pile of gravel here, some big erratics nearby, the giant current ripples, the squirrely, wormy, scalloped surface that all says the water's too deep and too fast for just normal river deposition. But that's not really what you're asking, is it?
Why couldn't that occur at the very earliest flood? They're taking a bunch.
Yep.
But not necessarily at the same
Oh,
this.
I see.
I want to say we have floods, huge ones, but then eventually each subsequent one works its way down to that depth, rather than that depth being up here originally.
Thank you for the question. I think I've got it now. Rephrasing, I think what you're saying is, okay, we've got 200 feet of water scouring Babcock Bench. Is it possible Babcock Bench went all the way across?
Yeah, at that time,
and then there's been,
each one has gone down farther and farther.
yeah. I think there's problems with that, but I can't think quickly enough to give you a good answer right now. I like your logic. What's one way? If we have a good date that this is 18,000 years scouring here, then I think it's going to be hard to cut this in 4,000 years. An 18,000 year flood and then a 14,000 year old flood. But there's probably other ways to answer your question as well that I'll think about it on the drive home and go, why didn't I say that? Yes?
What evidence might there be for prior floods and prior ice age? That might be part of the answer to it.
It might be, thank you. The question is, what evidence do we have for these prior ice flooding events, even like the much older ice that was in the area before the most recent ice age? I'll give you one quick answer. It's a hot topic right now. There are some very weathered gravels near Quincy, and they sit below some caliche or a calcrete, and there's some paleomagnetic evidence that those gravels were deposited when the Earth's magnetic field was reversed. In other words, older than 800,000 years ago. And so these early Wisconsin and ice floods, that's the time we're talking about. So many geologists who are out there are thinking about much of the flooding happening late, meaning in the last 25,000 years. But then there's new information coming in, ironically, about very old Ice Age floods. And that stuff at Quincy, as we currently view it, is the result of a big Ice Age flood that came down this valley older than 800,000 years ago, flooded the valley and went over the ridge the other way. And we dumped water into Quincy Basin from our valley. There's another reason, sir, that we might have a nice canyon here as much as 1 million years ago. That's one example, and it depends on who you talk to about how promising that is. But it's possible that much of the Ice Age flooding that we're seeing was hundreds of thousands of years ago, and then some of this stuff that's 18,000, 16,000, 14,000 is just frosting on the cake. Maybe most of the heavy excavation, the whole heavy lifting by the floodwater, maybe that was done almost 1 million years ago. We don't have enough dates to confirm that yet. How about 3 more and we're done? I think we're after 9 o'clock. 3 more and we're done. Who's got one more? Yes, sir.
Are there any erratics that we could see on our way out that are nearby?
Great question. Are there any erratics that are, well, in the gap?
That first gap, you can look up and see that big rock I told you about.
Okay, so there's some private property here. The Bishops are really wonderful people and great supporters of lots of this geology stuff. They have this beautiful house right at the end of the road. And I think Dave's got this land on both sides. So I don't think I want to just send you up on there, but there are some erratics up high. Can anybody think of an obvious erratic in Potholes Coulee?
Where the power line comes over in that gap right there, there's a huge one about 20 feet long right under that telephone pole.
Are they all granite?
Yep.
Many of them are granite. They stand out because they're lighter in color. I'll give you another example. I don't know how you're getting out of here, but if you get back on I-90 and there's a viewpoint before you drop to Vantage. So you're on I-90 coming past George. Just before you get to that viewpoint, there's a bunch of granite boulders that are rafted in by ice right next to the freeway that most people don't notice. Otherwise, I can't give you a good one just to drive to. Yes, sir.
If you're heading north,
Yeah.
right, at Carpiscan,
Okay.
on the talus slope of Basalt, there's a couple of white rocks that you can see from this side with binoculars.
And would you be on our side of the river or the other?
They're on the other side of the river.
Could you view them from this side of the river?
Yes, you can with binoculars.
Okay, so there's a great tip. Thank you. You can go up here. This is the road to Wenatchee on our side of the river. Get yourself perched, look up that canyon just to the north of West Bar, get some binoculars out and see a few boulders. Thanks much for that. One more. Yes?
Well, I guess I could phrase this as a question, but are you aware of a huge erratic at the top of 27th Street Northeast in East Wenatchee?
Yes.
Okay.
Cindy?
Yes.
It's good to see you. I recognize your voice. Former student Cindy. That's another answer. In downtown Wenatchee, on the east side of the Columbia, there's a little bike path and there's a place to walk by the old bridge, the 1908 bridge, and that's where Cindy lives in East Wenatchee. There are some amazing, I assume ice rafted, maybe flood tumbled erratics right there next to the road. That's the best place if you're heading up to Wenatchee. Right there with all that traffic, but right along the river, there's some beautiful metamorphic rocks and granite rocks that are clearly Ice Age floods. That's enough for this morning. I've enjoyed being with you. I don't know how many we have here, plenty, and I'm hoping to do this again sometime, maybe soon. So thank you for coming out. Thank you.
I'm Dave.
Hi, Dave.
When we leave here, if someone wants to drive, we can come out the house, they can look at that petrified log.
So we have Dave Bishop here. I didn't recognize you with that hat, man.
Jeannie over there.
Jeannie's over there. Great. Thank you guys for coming. So Dave owns this property down there, and you said
They can come out to the house behind the vineyard and see the petrified log if they want. We're going down there now.
oh my God. Okay, so here's an insider scoop. I don't know if you want all these guys down there, Dave. Okay. This is a rare treat. Dave and Janie own this beautiful house at the dead end down here, about 3 miles south. Dave has invited whoever wants to go down there right now. How would they pull in your drive, or how would?
Pull up the driveway and look out at the rock.
Great. So you could right.
Well, just come out through the vineyard. Don't hit the house.
Great. So at the end of the road, you'll see a big vineyard and a big, beautiful home that's less than 10 years old. Those guys live there, and I visited. I crashed their house the other day and said, "Have you heard about this Logitech?" And they're like, "It's right across the way." So they're inviting you to their home to go see this Logitech itself. You're not going to see it, I don't think, if you just go out on your own and hike around. So those are the guys, Dave and Jeannie. One-time opportunity. Head on down there. Thank you so much, Dave. What's for lunch? All right. Let's talk more. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm just going to say goodbye and see how many we have. We have 922 watching. And are we still live stream? There's comments there? Oh, good. There are still comments here. So thanks. I think if this recorded properly, I will, I'll keep this and post it on the YouTube page later today, I guess. I'll probably just delete the one that I was out here screwing around testing things. So thank you for joining us. This was an experiment. I guess if it worked well, I'll have to figure out how to pick other pop-up geology sites that I'm just processing what's happening over there, sorry. I'll have to make sure there's 3 bars so I can try this again. Okay, I'm turning you off now. Thank you for joining us. 9:09, not bad, not bad. Have a good day. Wish I had time to answer your questions, but I don't. Okay, thank you. I love you. And goodbye.